Hi guys, so we've made it to final time, and our final assignment was guided family conversations, and we were to interview or pretty much talk with a parent of a student with special needs. Well, lucky for me, I'm pretty active in our school district with subbing and trying to be involved as much as possible. So I've made a lot of connections with a lot of parents and families of children with special needs. The family I picked for this interview is one that's really near and dear to my heart. Um, I interviewed the parents of Corey, who is an 8-year-old little boy with autism. His parents are super active in being an advocate for him and in his whole life, really. They're so knowledgeable. I started off the interview asking questions about Corey and when they noticed there was something different. And his mom told me that they had slight suspicions around the time he was 1. They started noticing little things like rocking back and like a lot of rocking. He would bang his head on the floor, um, certain touches, and admit like he didn't do well when they left home. And those were kind of red flags. So when he was 2, they started kind of the process of seeing what exactly was wrong. She said between the age of 1 and 2, when they would go to doctor's appointments, the doctors would pretty much just tell him to wait, because he is a boy and he could. She said that they had mentioned that boys develop slower than girls or differently than girls, so they wanted to keep waiting and make sure that it wasn't just a delay somewhere. It turns out when he was 2, they started going to specialist appointments, and at one of the specialist appointments they were referred to an autism specialist, and they figured out that he was on the spectrum, and that began the process of the IFSP. And because of how late they figured it out, they only had the IFSP for like a year, and then they moved to the IEP when Corey was about 3.5. She said this process was heartbreaking. The dream she had for her child changed in the blink of an eye, and she said it's really normal to kind of be in shock because you never expect that this will happen to you. Just like we've kind of talked about throughout the semester, this can be really hard on parents, and talking to her, she blew my mind at the things they had to go through and how hard it was on them as a family. Corey's one of 3 siblings. His 2 older siblings are fully functional. Anna is 12 and Bailey is 10. So this came as a really big shock for Corey's parents. She also did mention that Anna and Bailey are the biggest support system ever for Corey. They're super understanding and they are so protective of him, and that like made my heart melt just because it's so awesome to see their family together. It's truly amazing. So after the time that they found out that Corey was autistic and they started the IFSP program, and they started doing different therapies. One of the therapies that they did was a senses therapy. I'll get the right name up, but and what this therapy helped with was pretty much what was wrong was he could not be dressed in anything but like cotton. Certain feelings, just it would trigger reactions and trigger meltdowns. It made it really hard for them to leave their house for a long time. And even to this day, Corey's parents are very social people, but if they're going to do something, people are coming to their house to kind of limit the reaction from Corey. What I thought was really awesome is Corey is smart. He is so smart, and he loves dinosaurs. Like, he could tell me more about dinosaurs than anyone else I think I know. So when I talked to his parents, they discussed that it's awesome to see him do so well cognitively, kind of, but socially he really struggles. And he struggles with conversation, and his speech is not where it would be for a student without autism. The parents discussed how they were terrified to send their child to school, simply because we are from such a rural school district that they were concerned that his needs wouldn't be met, or because he was one in, I mean, there's not a ton of kids, but he's probably the only kid in his district with autism. So they were terrified, and they had experienced quite a few problems with the school district. One thing she had mentioned was when the school was built, there wasn't a handicap entrance at all, which kind of seems like not a big deal because he's autistic, he's not wheelchair bound. But she said for him to change hands with the teacher, it was really hard because they'd have to walk through the hallways, and right when school started, and all the kids were there, and it was loud and it was noisy, and he really used to struggle with that. And when she would bring it up to the attention of administration, they kind of just played it off as there was no other way. Another instance that she encountered was she went to call the school about Corey's lunch, and the lunch people pretty much said that, well, we don't serve him lunch. And actually they had been, they just hadn't realized it. And just little things like that. She felt like he was a needle in a haystack, and it was really frustrating to her. And because she wasn't, this was also really new to her. It was really hard for her and Brian, her husband, to cope with this. Another thing she talked to me about was the strain on their marriage. And these are things that as educators we don't necessarily think about, but we ought to. Just like through this semester, we've kind of, like I said, we've talked about how it's important to pay attention to these things because these things affect your students, and they affect your families, and sometimes I know it's hard not to judge, but you have no idea the shoes that they walk in every day. And Corey's mom described a period of time, probably around the time Corey was 4, that her and Brian in their marriage were struggling very much because Corey wasn't as responsive to Brian, and Brian was confused, and he tried really hard, but Corey, the normal ways you would show affection and attention, Corey does not like that. He does not like being touched, so there's no really hugs or things of that nature. So it's the way that they encourage him is more verbally. It's a lot of praise and things of that nature. She also talked about how for the things that Corey can't do, there's a million things he can do better than anyone she knows. And I thought that was awesome because she described how, for one, Corey loves dinosaurs, and he can tell you absolutely everything about them. He's very organized, and he's honest. There's so many times that she said that, sometimes it can frustrate you, his blatant honesty, but it's something you appreciate because there's not a lot of people you meet every day that are as honest as Corey is. And he's 8. So that was really, really cool to me. Some other things that she explained to me was kind of the frustrations of realizing that Corey can't do everything she would want him to do. And hoping that other people kind of realize that too. She discussed soccer and t-ball and things of that nature that Corey just can't do. And she described that in the small towns, it's hard to find programs for him that are up his alley and are things that he can do. I guess they have been talking about a possible move to eastern Nebraska simply because there's a lot more resources out there that could help Corey be involved, and even after the high school transition, because that's something she said, even though he's 8 and he just, started his elementary education, she said that it's something she thinks about every day, about when he will transition out of high school and what's that going to look like. Will he ever live by himself? Will he ever hold a job? Will he ever fall in love? All the dreams and wishes that you have for your children, she questions those every day. Another thing that we had talked about was relationships with external family members. Like I said, Corey's super close with his sisters. They love each other so much, and it's pretty awesome to see. Brian and Emily's parents are very involved. And Emily will tell you there's no way that she could do it without them. She also talked to me about how they explored respite, but she described like the fear of someone that you don't know taking care of your kid, and your child that can be very impatient and can be very frustrating and can have blow-ups. And she's like, we can sympathize and we can be patient with him because we love him. And she's like, it's a fear of someone who's not that close to him trying to handle these situations. And especially because Corey's not great with speech and communication, she was fearful that he wouldn't be able to tell her if something did happen. And that's another reason why they were scared with school too, is because they felt like if something was going wrong, like he wouldn't be able to tell them. Another part of their relationships, like I mentioned earlier, is they've always been social people, and they've still managed to be social people. It's just the way they interact with others is different. Like they don't go to the pool, and they don't go, to a movie at a movie theater and bowling. Like they have movie nights with their close friends every Monday night. On Saturdays, they host the Husker games, and they've managed a way to make their schedule and their lifestyle work and still find, the pleasant things in everyday life that they can still do. And I mean, if you meet this family, they're so positive, and it blows my mind because they've been through so much, but yet they are so positive. And that's one thing Emily has said, is that it's been the hardest thing, but it's been the best thing, because her family, she feels, is so much better because of it. And I feel like that's the way that a majority of parents feel, regardless of if their kid has special needs. Their parents are grateful to have them. And even though they can be frustrating and difficult, like, I think it's important for educators to realize that this child is someone's whole life. And it's important to remember that when dealing with them at all. So yeah, their relationships with their external family are really important. And they're really blessed by it. They have friends, that'll come over, and they kind of know how their family works and all of that type of thing. We kind of talked about their financial situation and if that's been a struggle. Brian has a very good job, so they really haven't had to struggle all that much financially. One thing that did have to happen is Emily has always been a working woman, and she's always prided herself in that. But once Corey was diagnosed, she had to stay home. And she said that sometimes that can get to be overwhelming because there's so many days it's just her and Corey. And she just would love to have to go to work for the day and get a little break. So that was interesting to hear her say that. Corey is... Oh, sorry. So when we talked about the times throughout Corey's life that have been the hardest, and he's only 8 right now, so up to this point, she said the diagnosis was probably the hardest part, and then him starting school was very hard because it's just been an uphill battle, and it's unfortunate that they don't have the resources around here that they do elsewhere, and that's put a strain on the family as well, trying to figure out, well, do we move the girls from their classrooms in order to benefit, Corey, or do we stay until the girls are done and then when he's in high school we'll move? Or so there's a lot of big decisions that have to be made. Another big decision she talked about was medication, and she said that that was a really hard decision too, simply because they got so much information from so many different sources, and they almost felt pressured one way or the other, and they ended up putting Corey on medication, and she said that it helps tremendously, and she couldn't imagine a day in the life without it, really. And with sibling interaction, I talked about how the girls and Corey are super close. They protect their brother, which is great. And they understand. They're at an age where they can understand. When they were younger, Emily discussed how they were really confused when Corey would have meltdowns and tantrums because they weren't allowed to do that. And the reaction when they had a tantrum was different than when Corey had a tantrum. So that was confusing. But now in their older age, they understand, and they understand the differences, and they're very helpful. When it comes to affection, like I said earlier, Corey doesn't do hugs. He doesn't like being touched because his senses are so sensitive to certain feelings, and it almost overwhelms him. Oddly enough, though, when Corey, I was last year because he was 7, the family made a trip to Disney World, and this was a very highly anticipated trip from the girls, and Emily and Brian were very scared of what this might mean for Corey, but they stayed on the resort, so they decided to give it a try, and he loved it. She said it was the craziest thing ever, because for a child who is so sensitive and going to the one place in the whole world that floors all your senses, he loved it. He loved the 3D videos, he loved the roller coasters, like it was his favorite place in the world. And I thought this was a good point because it just goes to show that it's not a one-size-fits-all, and most people would assume to never take their child there because of their disabilities, but it worked out so well for their family and so well for Corey. So I think that's something you can integrate into your classroom as well. Like, what works for one child with a disability might not work for the other child, or it might work way better. So I don't think it's fair to put students in a shoebox and say, well, this is where you can be, and this is what you can do, and this is the things you're capable of, because quite frankly, that's not always the case. We didn't really talk about job skills much because Corey is so much younger. Like I said, she is fearful to when that time comes. She also said that because of the fact that he is pretty, he is very smart, and he does pretty well cognitively, that instead of like pushing flashcards and things like that, they focus a lot on social skills, or like living skills. So like, he's 8, but he'll fold laundry with Mom, and that's a really hard thing for him because all the touches. But it's things like that she works on and wants to work on with him at a young age, so by the time he is an adult, like, he can be proficient in those areas, and maybe he can be self-sufficient. A day in their life is crazy, to me, but it works for them. Mornings are always really rough. A lot of the times it's kind of a juggle to get the girls to school and activities, and to get Corey to therapy and school and everything like that. She feels like she constantly has a meeting one way or another. But the mornings are rough. Corey doesn't really like getting up, and it's hard to get him up and going and ready for the day. And the girls will get frustrated because sometimes they're late for school. And that was a red flag too to me, because that's something I remember discussing this semester. Like, when siblings are late and you get on these siblings, but it's not their fault. I mean, yeah, it's going to take them a little longer in the morning if Mom has to help Corey, you know? So that was something that I thought was interesting. Socialization, like I said, Brian and Emily are very social people, so they have a lot of friends, and their friends usually have kiddos. And I feel like when I've been around, everyone's kids all play with Corey. I mean, Corey has he's it's not the kind of play that they play with each other, because Corey's not really capable of that, or doesn't really appreciate that kind of play. But they will always try to like include him, or go say hi, or when he's playing with his dinosaurs, they'll go and sit and watch him. So that's kind of nice. But most of the kids know the things you can do and the things you can't do. They don't try to touch him and things like that. So he's lucky. They are lucky in that fact that I guess that's one of the perks of a smaller community, is because everyone knows and kind of understands, and their kids know and kind of understand. So it does give him a bigger social group. When it comes to kids with autism that he sees, once a month, the special education program in their district takes the kids and they go do something. So with other kids with disabilities from other schools. And sometimes they go to the rec center, or they go bowling, or they go places like that. And this is really awesome because for one, it exposes Corey to these places where he is not usually at. And it helps him to meet kids like him. And I don't know if it's super beneficial now, but as he grows, I think it will become the most beneficial thing. Also, throughout his entire life, he's brought so many great things and so many challenges to this family. And like I said, they are the most positive people I've ever met. And it was such a breath of fresh air to get to sit and talk to them. If there's anything I learned from this lesson that I can incorporate back to the whole semester, was it all makes sense, talking to this family. The IEP process can be horrible. The IFSB process can be horrible on parents, and especially when they don't feel like their kids are being valued. Being judgmental as an educator, you have no idea. And I think that's something that'll stick with me throughout my entire career. This interview that I just had with these parents. They're trying their hardest. They're doing the best they can. Also, something else that I can think of that I could integrate back into this whole lesson was families as partners, in evaluating the student and in developing IEPs. Emily discussed sometimes feeling out of the loop, because when things were happening, Corey couldn't necessarily come home and tell her, and it made her feel really left out. So I do think it's really important to partner with parents and listen to what they have to say, because they're with this child all the time, and this child is their whole world. It's their main priority. So why wouldn't they have the best interest in mind? And I mean, I understand that there are exceptions, but that is the general rule, I feel. Family interactions, by talking to them, it all plays in together. Corey's life affects the girls' life. The girls' lives affect Corey's life. All three kids' life affect their parents' life. Sometimes, the girls will act as more of a parental role to Corey. And, you might not see that in a typical 8, 10, and 12-year-old siblings that one doesn't have a disability. So it's things like that that really change up, the roles in the families. And I mean, obviously, everything we've talked about this semester really just became really clear when I interviewed this family. It was an awesome experience. It's some of that conversation was, like I said, stick with me for the rest of my career. So I hope you found this informative, and I hope it makes you think about what you want it to be as an educator, and really think about the parents that you're dealing with and their kiddos, because a lot of these families are really, really special, and they're really great people, and I truly think that these kids deserve the best regardless of disability. So thanks guys. I hope you enjoyed this one. Have a happy Thanksgiving.